Okay, this is just a quick little video to show you how to get a Nerf Disruptor back together. This is the one we used at our recent Nerf Mod Party, and I like it because the shell comes into several different pieces and lets us paint them separately, so you don't have to do any masking. Reassembly, this is the handle. So these parts have plastic tabs on them that hold them together, so it's pretty much just snapping those back into place. And then inside shell, line these back up into place. So there are a couple of kind of press fit posts that can benefit from having you take your green scrubby or your sandpaper and sanding them down. That'll kind of help with a little bit with the reassembly. If you've done very light layers, you should be okay. We're just pressing those until these click into place here. And then, as you can see, this turns out really nice because we've got three separate colors going here that the my grandson picked out. Each one we paint them separately. So now the trick is to get all this back together. And so the first thing you're going to want to do is, if you took this slider turn spring off, there's this small silver screw that attaches that, and then that slides up to the upper slot and comes over this post right here. So that's your first thing. Accessory rail piece. The older blasters have a spring. Newer blasters do not, which makes life a little easier. Of course, part of our rule was that these had to stay orange for safety. And of course, that leads to an interesting discussion about why we do that. This is your main assembly. Some of these blasters, we upgraded the springs. There's NF Strike spring you can get for about $4, which is actually more than I usually spend for a thrift store spring. You want to clean that out and re-lube it as well. I use white lithium grease, but there's some other greases you can use. This is the trigger catch right here, so that needs to be pointing downwards, and that will mate with, later you'll see this trigger catch mechanism. So I can never remember, so if you remove your plunger, you'll have to know which way to put that in, and that's with the teeth down. And that slides in there, and you'll feel it kind of click into place. So the spring needs to go up far enough to where it's inside the boundaries there, like that. So he painted his barrel kind of a coyote tan, which was kind of cool. If you have like rub and buff, you can add some silver. That looks kind of cool. So that kind of just snaps into place. This is spring loaded. That goes there. So trigger catch release, and this has the kind of indicator that lets you know if the blaster's primed or not. I do usually put a little bit of lube on any kind of sliding surface, especially if it's been painted. It gets a little bit tacky, so it makes it kind of hard to operate. Now there's two springs in here, hopefully you haven't lost. This usually stays retained onto the, this is the trigger return spring, and that'll usually stay attached pretty well unless the child pulls it off. And so it has a well here, and then there's a post here. I'll usually put a little bit of lithium grease around that, and a little bit of lithium. This is a friction surface here, a little bit of lithium grease on there. And so yeah, this goes in first, this goes in second on top of it, and yeah, of course, you know, you usually end up taking these apart and putting them together several times. So hopefully this video will help you save a couple of repetitions on that. So yeah, so when this gets primed, this comes all the way back, hooks into there, and then when you pull the trigger, it pulls down or releases it, and then the spring forces it through. So now this is probably the trickiest part here, is the spring here, and unfortunately they left us a little opening, and if you just feed that spring in and work it down in there and press it in, you should be able to get that in. So you want that spring to force it upwards. And that is that. And now the trigger has, there's one screw in here, sometimes it's silver, but it has a large kind of flange on it, and that'll hold your trigger in place. And I think this will work without it in there, but just to be sure, and since this is underneath that, that'll kind of hold that in place as well. And always kind of fiddling with things to make sure everything feels like it's moving okay. I've already reassembled the second part of the shell, and again, this is where these posts here, there's one here, and one here. They're kind of friction fit on the upper half of the shell, so if you've got paint on those, if you can scrape those down a little bit, it'll make it easier, because you know you're going to have to pull this apart at least once or twice. And then just starting to feel, so your indicator needs to come on the outside of the shell, like so, and if you're lucky you'll feel it snap into place. You're looking at all your seams, making sure things are closing up. If they don't, then you want to reopen it and figure out why. So that's still moving, trigger's moving good, and you can see how the indicator goes up and down. There's two screws inside the slide, which will need to be tightened before you go too far into this. So I usually like to function check this as early as possible, and to do that you're going to have the full slide in place. So I'll do these two screws, then bring my slide in, and a lot of times if you pull this back just a hair and then mate it up, that'll make it so that it engages those tangs. You hear it click, and again we're looking at our seam is good. At this point you should be able to function check your blaster. So it's all loose, so I'm kind of holding it together, holding this together, pulling back. So I heard the click, so that's the trigger catch engaging. This will slide forward because of that spring, and then if all goes well as planned, there's the release and the boom. So if none of that functions correctly, then it's time to go back apart and figure out where that's at. But since it did, it's time to put it all together. And I usually run the screws in just a hair and then let the kids run them in as far as they can, and then come back in and tighten them up. And then once that's all done, load a dart in it and function check it once again. And then you're ready for a blaster war. So I hope that saves you some pain. You kind of learn these things just doing it many times. I really like the Disruptor because it's inexpensive, and it does have the 3 separate shell pieces, where it's like a strong arm is a single shell, and if you want to get this kind of color scheme, you'd have to do some masking and painting. Alright, so I hope that helped you out. This was Ken from Maker's Box. Thanks for watching.